Hi. So it's Pastor Timmery here. Um, had trouble at the church streaming the sermon this morning, so doing it later this afternoon. But today we're talking about Emmanuel, God with us, and what does that feel like now that Christmas is over? I mean, we spent weeks, even months, preparing for the season of Advent and Christmas. We went shopping, we did the events, we went to the parties, we hosted grandkids, we wrapped presents, we had trimmed our tree. It's got sparkles and lights. We had a playlist for Christmas. We had family over for the holidays. We prepared brunches and lunches and dinners and all the things, right? And so during all that time, it is so easy to feel as if, yes, God is with us. We are preparing. Advent is to prepare us for the arrival of Jesus. And then with the flip of a switch, with the turning of the calendar, it's not Christmas anymore. It's not Christmas anymore. So that is going to be the point of the sermon series because now that it's not Christmas, I think we can ask ourselves, is is Jesus still with us? Is he still Emmanuel, God with us even now? Even in the week where it feels gray, when it feels, I don't know, maybe a little bit of a letdown. Maybe you're feeling a little gray and disappointed today. I don't know. But I think there is room to explore when things are not holly and jolly, when things are not festive any longer. What does that do inside us? How are our hearts responding to this ordinary time when we're not looking forward to anything in the near future, when we have put away the beauty and the festiveness and the families left us? This reminds me of a few years ago, I created for one of my friends. She was teaching Sunday school. She teaches kids and she does a beautiful job of working with the kids. And I remember that they were in the book of Genesis and they were studying Abraham. And so what I decided to do, what I thought would be fun, because I knew what their schedule, what their tentative plans were for the next several weeks, and they were covering the life of Abraham in Genesis. And so I made this doodle search page, which was a huge hit, mostly among the adults. But what it was this elaborate little black and white drawing. It was done as a two-page spread, so it's 11 by 17. But kid you not, all the figures on that page, it's in black and white, all the figures were just minuscule, right? And so imagine the entire page set up. You've got mountains and palm trees and little cities and camels galore and rams and sheep and all these little people, all these little figures. And what it was scenes depicted from Genesis. And at first glance, I mean, it just looks like this black and white scribble mess, right? The closer you look, the closer you're able to discover, oh, that teeny tiny little figure. Oh, look, there's the time when these three angelic visitors came to Sarai and Abraham, right? And then, oh, look at that tiny little village. Is it being destroyed by like fire and brimstone and hail? What is that? And it's where all of a sudden the bits and pieces that we read about in Abraham's life, they fall onto the page. And with a little bit of context, with a little bit of awareness, we know we're being told, yes, the life of Abraham is depicted on this page. And understanding that, you begin to sort out. You begin to look closely at the details. You begin to count how many rams there are. You begin to see the stories. You begin to see, oh, is that Melchizedek that Abraham is dining with? All these little stories that were in scripture now are drawn out. And you begin to recognize what they are with a little bit of time, with a little bit of patience, with a little bit of focus, a little bit of intimacy of the story, a little bit of an understanding. And all of that leads us to this world of discovery. It leads us to those beautiful aha moments. I found you. And I think that's kind of something that never quite gets old. I designed that for the children, but I was pleasantly surprised to find that the adults enjoyed it as well. You know how it goes. You supply a little list and it's going to tell you to look for the 10 camels or um yeah, you spy Pharaoh, angry Pharaoh as he's mad at Abraham, or just whatever it was, you had a list, and that was kind of your guide. And so you knew you were being told by the author what is on the page, that it does exist, and that given enough time and focus, you can find what appears to be hidden. And I think that applies to God, that applies to our experience of Emmanuel, God with us right now. And we're not the only ones who have struggled to see God. I think about a man who he maybe struggled to see God in scriptures. His grandfather absolutely had crazy, wild encounters with God. And that grandfather's name was Abraham. And Abraham's going to tell him all about the stories, right? Just what I described to you about meeting Melchizedek, about God showing up and making a covenant with him, about the time the angelic visitors came, all the conversations that Abraham has had with God along the ways. And then you're going to come to Isaac. And Isaac also has his experiences with God. He also has heard, he's also got this covenant. Isaac's going to tell you firsthand what it was like to have a knife ready to plunge into his body as a sacrifice to the Lord. And Isaac is going to tell you about the time that an angel of the Lord stopped dad from making that sacrifice. You got Abraham, you got Isaac. And if you're Jacob, you might not have those stories. You've been surrounded by the stories, you've heard the experiences, and because of that, your family believes because they have these experiences, they have these tales, they have these encounters with the living God, and it has changed them. But maybe Jacob doesn't have that experience. In fact, Jacob's got a twin brother, and there always seems to be competition. Jacob doesn't seem to be anything special. And in fact, Jacob is actually not even his dad's favorite. Esau's dad's favorite. Jacob doesn't even have that going for him. He is, however, his mother Rebecca's favorite. And although Jacob may not have been hearing from God, God still had a mark on his life. He had a promise for Jacob that Jacob is going to receive the blessing, that the lineage is going to fall through Jacob's line, not Esau's. And as the second born, this seemed unlikely. This just seemed unlikely. So, through a few shenanigans, some shady behavior on he and his mom's part, he gets that firstborn blessing. It ticks off Esau pretty bad. It was more than just a few good words from dad. It carried with it the weight and the glory and the responsibility of what God intended for them and their family lineage. And Esau is ticked off. And in that anger, in that sense of being thwarted, in that frustration, he starts to make death threats towards Jacob. And Jacob doesn't seem to have much of a tie anywhere to home. I mean, he's this boy who does not know the living God, perhaps. He knows about him. He's not dad's favorite. There's not maybe a sense of security in Jacob's life. And so what does he do? Well, Mama Rebecca takes things into her own hands, and hearing the threat, she decides that it is high time Jacob gets married. It is definitely going to be important to her that Jacob marries the right woman, not a Canaanite woman, which is God had clear instructions: don't marry the Canaanites. But what did Esau do? Married the Canaanites, multiple of them. And so, under this guise of Jacob getting a wife, she arranges this to spare his life. We're going to pick up the story. If you want to open up your Bibles with us, we are reading the story out of the book of Genesis. It's the very first book of the Bible. We are in Genesis chapter 28, and we're starting in verse 10. Says Jacob left Beersheba and set out for Haran. When he reached a certain place, that's code for nowhere special, right? He's in the boonies. When he reached a certain place, he stopped for the night because the sun had set. Taking one of the stones there, he put it under his head and lay down to sleep. He had a dream in which he saw a stairway resting on the earth with its top reaching to heaven, and the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. There above it stood the Lord, and he said, I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham, and the God of Isaac. I will give you and your descendants the land on which you are lying. Your descendants will be like the dust of the earth, and you will spread out to the west and to the east, to the north and to the south. All peoples on earth will be blessed through you and your offspring. I am with you and will watch over you wherever you go. And I will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. And when Jacob awoke from his sleep, he thought, surely, surely the Lord is in this place, and I was not aware of it. Surely the Lord was in this place, and I was not aware of it. He was afraid and said, how awesome is this place? This is none other than the house of God. This is the gate of heaven. And early the next morning, Jacob took the stone he had placed under his head and he set it up as an altar and he poured oil on top of it. He called that place Bethel, which means the house of the Lord, though the city used to be called Luz. Isn't that good? Don't you love that? We've got this Jacob who does not know God. He has done all the things. He's heard all the stories. He's heard the prophecy about him that it's going to be the lineage that flows through his line, not Esau's line, not dad's favorite, Esau's dad's favorite. He's heard all about the promises. He's heard all about how Grandpa Abraham walked with God. And some days, maybe dad seems a little cranky and curmudgeonly, but dad still has his own experiences that he's going to talk about. But not Jacob. Jacob's not had that. He's heard all about God, but up to that point in life, it's been business as usual. He goes through the motions because his family follows Yahweh. His family has this encounter. And what do followers of Yahweh do? Maybe he goes through the motions. Maybe he is singing the songs. Maybe he gives the offerings and he listens to the stories. He goes through the motions, but actually talk to God? Nah, that's for grandpa. Maybe even dad. Hear from God? No, he has never heard from God. Experiences of heavenly visitors, of angelic visitations, of God making the covenant with him, that has never happened. Jacob might be thinking that he's nothing special and that God really is for people like grandpa and dad. He's not a part of it. So Jacob does his thing. He manages the household. He takes care of the camp and the town and the city and the tribe, right? He's busy. He's doing the things. But now that he's stolen the birthright, he's on the run. And one night on this journey, what we just read, that night changes him. It changes his perspective in a way where he will never be the same again. Remember that dream. We're going to know it as Jacob's ladder, although there's some indication that would say, hey, actually, it wasn't a ladder that he dreamed about. It was probably a stairway, this little ziggurat, like what they would have seen in the buildings locally at that time. What does he see on the stairwell? Well, he sees angels. He sees them coming, he sees them going. And at the top, he has this vision of God when God is speaking to him and secures this promise in him that, yes, God sees you, Jacob. Just like he sees you and just like he sees me, God sees and he speaks. Now, in that vision of this stairwell with the angelic beings that are going up and that are coming down, and you've got God present in the middle of it, what do you not see? Well, nowhere near that stairway are people. Now, God is with Jacob, as it turns out. Jacob is this jealous, codependent liar. And what Jacob discovers is that the ladder, the stairway, isn't for Jacob, the codependent, to climb. The stairway was not made for people. It's to remind us that God is accessing us, no matter our state, no matter the heart condition we find ourselves in. God accesses our world. He crashes into our sphere. He comes down and he engages with us. He walks around with us. He sent Emmanuel, his son, to be with us. He's doing the work. He made himself accessible to us. He does not ask us to climb the stairs to seek him. All we have to do, like Jacob, is open our eyes. Surely, surely the Lord is in this place, right where you're at, right where I'm at. The Lord is in this place. And I wasn't even aware of it. You see, Jacob never had the eyes to see God with him. And this dream, it changes everything for him. The promise that I will be with you is one of the most frequent promises in scripture. It's something that God has told to Adam and to Eve, to Enoch, to Noah, to Abraham, to Jacob, to Joseph, to Moses, to David, to Amos, to Mary, to Paul. And with the birth of Christ and Jesus himself has come and he has told you and he has told me, I am God with you. We think about what spiritual growth is. Spiritual growth is simply increasing our capacity to experience the presence of God. That's what John Ortberg has told us. Spiritual growth, simply increasing the capacity to experience the presence of God. That leads us back to that Abraham doodle search drawing that I was telling you about at the beginning of this. You've got the story in front of you, but do you have the eyes to see? There's a guide that's even going to tell you this is what's on the page. All you have to do is look. And at first glance, if you're distracted, you see none of it. You just see lines, you see the black and white scribbles, and it makes you want to cross your eyes just a little bit because everything's so tiny and it's not obvious, not always, what you're looking for. To see Abraham, you have to focus. You have to familiarize yourself with the story. You have to read over the list. You have to understand what it is that you're looking for. You have to understand what it is that you're expected to see. You have to familiarize yourself with the drawing style of the artist. You have to take a look. Maybe you explore the entire page, top to bottom, left to right, just to see what you can see. And sometimes it's hard to see, isn't it? Sometimes it's really tricky. And you might even be convinced, I don't think this artist actually put this on the page. Have you ever had that experience? It's so frustrating. You search and you cannot find. It's hard. It can be tricky. And it's kind of fun though when we discover it. But you and I we're probably liking it better when God comes to us obvious. We like that experience is just sweet. That is like, that is the best ever feeling. Like we like it when God shows up obvious. I'm thinking about the time that he showed up to Noah and he gave him a rainbow. And I think Noah in that day, who had never seen such a thing, never heard of such a thing, that blew his mind. And he was like, whoa, God is with me. I'm thinking about the other day. I was driving home from the hospital. I was visiting one of my people who was in urgent. She was in the ICU, and I just remembered that this has been a heavy season, and there were several people that were just battling really difficult situations coming up in their lives, just pain, suffering, struggle. And I remember as a pastor hearing about all of this, and it just tugs at your heart. Some days are hard as a pastor when you get told and you want to carry things alongside people. And you know that for some of those people, life is not going to be the same. It's just hard. And I was driving home from the ICU that day visiting, and I felt the weight of it. On that drive home, it was a dry day, sun in the sky, and out of nowhere, I see a rainbow. In my upper left vision, I see this rainbow. And I'm driving down and I'm like, that's amazing. That's pretty. And then I see the second rainbow. It's close to the first rainbow. And that's pretty amazing. Anytime you can see a double rainbow, it's like, yes, that's gorgeous. Well, I turn the corner and there's rainbow one, rainbow two, there's the sun, and all of a sudden, yes, I see a third rainbow in the sky. And in that moment, you better believe I was like, God is with me. He is in this place. Thank you, Lord. I needed that. I needed that reminder that you're with me because my heart was heavy. Now, let me ask you this. I saw three rainbows. Beautiful. Never seen anything like it. And I knew that God was with me. But was God not with me 10 minutes previous to that? The hour before? What about the day before? There were no rainbows then. Circumstances were heavy. Now let me fast forward. What about the day after? Again, nothing's changed in the circumstances. Things are still heavy, but there's no rainbows in the sky. Does that mean God isn't with me anymore? Was God less present because I didn't see a rainbow? I didn't see him. Sometimes we don't see the rainbow. And so we're tempted to get into a rut, aren't we? Sometimes we don't always see the flashing lights, the blaring reminder that God is with us. And when that doesn't happen, we can get complacent. We go through our ordinary routines. Life becomes normal. We have our spiritual ruts. We do our Bible reading. We go to church. It's just what we do. Sometimes we go to Sunday school or Bible class or whatever we may be, a small group. And we just go through the motions. Nothing stands out. Our awareness isn't necessarily pricked. And so, what does that leave us with? We're comfortable in this routine. I mean, we know theoretically that God's with us, but we don't really see him. And what does that do to us internally? I think it means that we start to worry just a little bit easily. We begin to make plans without asking God. We start to think, I've got this figured out. Or maybe even, I need to figure this out because God isn't showing up. But here's the deal, even without the rainbow, even without the crazy bold presence what that screams at us, I'm here, I'm with you, even without the Christmas decor, even without the nativity set, without the presents, without the lights and the Christmas carols that announce everywhere that Jesus is with us, that he is Emmanuel, that he came as a baby to dwell on earth with us. When all of that's gone, God is still present. He's still present. We're people that are prone to habituation. And what that means is that we acclimate to things, that we see something and it may catch our attention the first few times. We may be thinking, oh, that's new, or I see that. And my perception is really heightened. I am hyper aware of that. I think about that like whenever I create a drawing or a painting and I see I see a mistake or I see something I don't like. And every time I will walk by it, I'm tempted just to look at that one area and think, I need to fix that. I need to go. I need to massage that. I need to tweak that. That needs to be painted over. It needs to be changed. But let me tell you this, the longer I wait, the longer I'm tempted to be like, it's not that bad. Yeah, it's there, but I think I'm okay with it now. We think about that with our furniture, right? Like if I've got a scratch on my dining room table, I'm like, "Ooh, I need to fix that. I need to buff that out. I need to refinish that. I need to do something." But, a week passes, a year passes, and the table still looks the same, but I'm kind of okay with it now. I've gotten comfortable with it. I've gotten used to it. We acclimate to things pretty easily as humans. And we can do that spiritually too. We get spiritually habituated. We're just in spiritual maintenance mode, right? We're okay. We're not in any scandalous sin. So we just operate on autopilot. We do the readings, we do the church attendance. We tithe, we sing the hymns. We go to service. Sometimes we even volunteer. Sometimes we speak up in Sunday school. We're doing okay. But friends, Jesus didn't go through the torture. He didn't lose liters of blood. He didn't suffocate on a cross, bearing the weight and the shame of sin, of your sin, of my sin, just so that we could be okay. When something's constantly in front of us, we learn to tune it out. Like parenting by raising your voice so that your kids will listen. Well, eventually you've raised your voice often enough that your kids start to tune out your normal voice. And what you've done is you've trained them to only listen when you yell. What happens when you whisper? Have you tried this? Do you do this at home? Maybe you're wanting to plan like a birthday surprise or you're talking about something secret. And so you whisper, you lower your voice. Now, it seems like magic, but anytime somebody starts to whisper, I feel like our curiosity is automatically engaged. We're like, what are they talking about? Are they talking about me? Is it good? Is it juicy? What are they saying? I want to know. I want to be in on it. There's a sense of something that's secret, and it just stirs up our curiosity as people. We lean in when somebody whispers. Our listening becomes more sensitive. Our focus is captured. And sometimes when God isn't always in the flash of Christmas decorations and the lights and the carols and the sweaters and the music and the family and the parties and the Christmas cookies. Sometimes when all of that goes away and it's just ordinary, sometimes I think it's God whispering to us. He's no longer shouting at us. And when he whispers, he's inviting us. Would you lean in? Come lean a little bit closer. Tune your ears a little bit harder. Stop being distracted by everything else and push everything else aside because this is going to require everything within you to lean in and to hear when it's quiet. So how do we practice that, people of God? How do we practice that? How do we even do that when, especially when we're like Jacob and maybe we've just heard the stories about God and the flashy experiences and the rainbows and the big moments and the times when God walked with somebody that happened to our grandpa or to our dad, but it's never happened to us. We've heard other people have encounters of God. And so, how do we do that when it's not flashy, when God whispers? And there's nothing dramatic, there's nothing special, there's nothing sensational, there's no colorful colors, a rainbow in the sky. Well, one of the things that John Ortberg suggested, he does this little practice that's called reviewing the dailies. And if you're in the film making industry, You're going to be familiar with that. And what it is you're going to go through what you have shot, the footage that you've created in that day, in the hour, whatever it may be. It's called reviewing the dailies. And what that is while your characters still have the costumes, while the makeup is still there, while the set is still up and things haven't been switched around, you can go through that film footage and decide, oh, you know what? Maybe we need to tweak this, we need to reshoot that. And while everybody's still in costume, while the set is still as it should be, you can go in and pretty easily make that edit. It's also really confidence building whenever your actors and your team and your set manager, they can see, oh my goodness, things are going right. What if we did that in our everyday lives? What if we reviewed our own dailies? What if we were to play back the footage of our day and we were to start before breakfast, and rather than looking for the scenes in order to reshoot them or to change them, maybe we're looking for God to show up as we review the dailies. Think about breakfast. Where was he then? Did he get you out of bed? Did he fill your life and lungs with oxygen? Did he allow you to rise out of bed and face the day? What about the commute to work? Did he protect you as you drove or rode on a piece of equipment that probably weighs tons? He kept other people from crashing into you. Now, what about when you're at work and you encounter the customers and the clients and the kids, all the things that make up your day? Did you see little snippets of God in those conversations? Did you see Him holding your tongue? Did you see the grace that was lavished out and the kindness of that interaction? Did you see the love and the joy and the peace and the patience and the kindness and the goodness and the gentleness and the self control in life? Those are all the little fingerprints of God. He was with you. He did show up, and it was quiet. And like that Abraham search grid, that search doodle, you had to look. You had to hone in on each section. You had to take a look at the list. Oh, yep, the list says that I'm going to see God on this page. And when you looked for it, that's when you start to sharpen. It builds intimacy. That's when we start to affirm what we have learned through the sermons, what we've been reading in the Bible, the conversations that we've had in Bible study and life group and Sunday school. It comes to life when we look for it. It builds intimacy. Then we understand who God is. He's more than a black and white text on a page. It takes practice. Takes practice. And sometimes with enough practice, you don't have to review the day before. Sometimes you're going to start to see God in real time. You're going to start to see God in the moment, in that conversation, in the engagement, in the conversation, in our relationships. You're going to see God in real time. We know that God is faithful and we know that He's true. We know that He's God, Emmanuel, God with us. He tells us He's with us always until the end of the age. But what do we do when we can't see Him? What do we do when we have hunted high and low? Just like that doodle search page, we looked everywhere and we didn't see Him. Now, has God deserted you? Hmm? You can't find Him. Can't see Him. No rainbow in the sky. And everywhere you look in your day, you never found Him. Is He gone? I'm going to say that sometimes maybe He is harder to find than others. Maybe it's to help you build an anticipation. Maybe it's to help you build awareness. Maybe it's to heighten your own need, your own longing. When we can't predict an outcome, when we don't know how the story ends, we tend to lean in, don't we? If we're talking about a Shakespearean play, We know who's going to die. We don't even have to go and watch the play. We know it's going to happen. But on the other hand, when you go to a football game, you've got two teams that are walking onto the field, skillful players, good coaches, and you don't even know how that game is going to go. You do not know the outcome. And so that's why we watch. That's why we lean in. That's why our focus and our attention is captured. It's because we can't predict the ending and we're curious. We want to see how it unfolds. That's sometimes what it's like whenever we can't find God. He allows our anticipation to be heightened. He allows us to get a little bit hungry for Him. It makes finding Him all the sweeter. This is how faith works. I might not always see you, God, but you're there. This is how we build our spiritual muscle. We have to, whenever we have to look, I'm going to say that it tests us in a way that the flashy encounters with God just don't. Whenever we have rainbow in the sky days, whenever God shows up with the angels, whenever we walk with God in the cool of the night, that takes less faith. But whenever our hearts long for Him, that gets us out of this robotic mode, right? Think about when you're driving and there's a police car anywhere around you, in front of you, behind you, beside you, anywhere. You're driving and you see that police car. What happens to your driving whenever you see the presence? I'm going to tell you what happens to me. I like to speed. So whenever I see a cop car, I tend to slow down. I watch and make sure that I am not touching my cell phone, nowhere near my cell phone. Nope. I am driving speed limit. Not because I want to. I actually like to speed. But whenever that cop car is present, you better believe that I am going to do speed limit. And it isn't because I suddenly developed this love for the law. It's not because all of a sudden I love to drive slower and more cautiously and obey cell phone laws. No, it's because I don't want to be punished. And so I will go through and I will do all the right things because I don't want to face the consequences. And I think sometimes God with us, we can desensitize ourselves. Um, our love for God, whenever we know that He's always with us, it becomes that same sort of way. We're going to go through the motions. And it isn't that our heart isn't engaged, our heart doesn't want to do the things. It's because it's what's expected of us. I think sometimes God doesn't want robot hearts that do things out of obligation for Him. He wants to be wanted. And so, what if we have to look for Him a little bit more hard? Whenever we have to look more close, whenever it takes more focus, more attention, I think God's okay with that because He wants us to want Him. Those search and find puzzles are going to develop our muscles in ways that rainbows never will. Whenever we begin to see the glimpses of God in the ordinary, in our everyday, when things aren't special, when there's no glitz, no glamour, no lights, no presents, no Christmas songs, it's just God's word and His presence that show up in the cracks, in the conversations. And we see fruit of the Spirit in the people that we interact with, and we see God even growing us as we respond. That's how we get to know God. We have those little sneaky peeks, and we get to say, "Found ya. I found ya." Now, if we're trained to only hear grandpa's stories or dad's stories or to only see God in the rainbows, we're going to miss the average ordinary days. We're going to miss God in the ordinary moments. After all, even when Jesus came, He came with nothing majestic in His form. There was no beauty in Him that we should desire Him. He looked very ordinary, and what we did, we despised Him when He came. And so we have to guard so that we don't do the same today. People missed Him. when he was on earth. And what about you and I today? Will we miss him? Will we yearn for his presence now that the decorations are gone and the music has stopped and it doesn't feel like God's with us? We're going to have to practice. We're going to have to train our eyes to see the glimpses of him hidden on the page. Like a search and find, we get a spike of delight when we finally see him. He was there all along, just like you and me. He's here with us. Jacob learned to live like that. It took him a hot minute. But once he encountered God, once he began to understand that God is in this place, and surely he didn't know it, surely he was not aware of it. But God, that didn't mean that God wasn't there. God was always there. Jacob just didn't have the eyes to see it. That changed the way Jacob began to live. Now, 20 years after he saw that stairwell to heaven, hmm, 20 years after the death threat from his brother, 20 years after he saw God ascending and descending that stairwell, making God's way to Jacob, Jacob's vision has now changed and he starts to go home. He meets the brother that he has wronged, the brother that wanted to kill him. And at first he's fearful. I think I would be too. And so his plan is I'm going to send everything ahead of me. I'm going to send these gifts. I'm sending goats and camels and all these things. Just hundreds of them actually, just to keep him happy. Just to sweeten him up just a little bit. But finally, after all this entourage of animals, he gets to Esau. And these two brothers that haven't seen each other for 20 years, they hug. The one that has been wronged, the one that has issued a death threat, these two men, they hug. And Genesis 33:10 says that Jacob told Esau, "For to see your face is like seeing the face of God." Jacob could look at this man who was his enemy. And rather than seeing through the earthly lens, through just seeing the flesh and blood, he's able to see the face of God. That changed him, that encounter with God, that understanding that God is around him all the time, that God is pursuing, that God is wooing, that God is actively intimate in his story. That changed Jacob's heart. And he began to see and to be aware of God, even when he least expected it. I'm going to say that after you've seen God in the most unlikely of places, you and I, we can both begin to recognize God in the ordinary. We can see him everywhere in our days. We can see him in our coming and our going, in our waking and our sleeping, in our conversations and in our thought life, in the things that we consume on social media and TV. We begin to see and to begin to interact with God in these ordinary, everyday moments, even in the faces of ones that we thought were enemies. God is with us, Emmanuel.